Thanks. Well, it's a great privilege to be able to hear from our next speaker, Scott, our police chief at New Hope, Scott Slauson. So I would love to you to share a little bit more that we talked about earlier, and then also open up for some questions. So you have the floor.
All right, well, thank you, Reed, for the invitation. This is great. I'm Scott Slauson. I'm a police captain with New Hope. I've been in the investigations division, running the division for about 10 years now. I'm spending a couple months filling in for our police chief position. There'll be a permanent one named in another week or two. I am not in the running for that since I'm retiring in a couple years. Both of us captains are going to be retiring soon. So we're trying to get people who are going to be a little longer term in these positions. Just the department and the city deserves that. So part of the investigations division is the school resource officers. We've typically a school resource officer lasts 3-4 years, some a little longer, before they kind of need a change. So we do have new school resource officers rotating in from time to time. Josh Ernessy at Cooper will be going back this year. His partner left for the Eden Prairie Police Department recently. So we will have a new school resource officer as Josh's partner. With that said, I know you're Armstrong, but we're both 281 schools. We do things very similar to the Plymouth Police Department. I'm sure both Armstrong and Cooper are run very similar. So I would think my experience with the SROs and Cooper and 281 is probably pretty similar to what Plymouth experiences with Armstrong. One of the things Reed had mentioned that you might be curious about is how incidents get decided for what the outcome will be. Will this be just mediated, or will there be school discipline? Will we refer this straight for criminal charges? And I'll fill you in on our rule of thumb for how we deal with those and how our school resource officers make those decisions. When we send the school resource officers to the school, we're sending them with a lot of discretion. We're sending them with a lot of training and resources. And they have the ability to, first of all, know the student as well as any staff member just about. So they can kind of decide among all the resources that are available what the most productive outcome is going to be. And they will use that in coordination with the school staff. If it's going to be school discipline, they're going to be referred outside for mediation, or if we're going to go ahead and just write the referral for charges, we will do that. The guiding rule of thumb in that is usually the victim. And if there's an outright assault on a student or staff where someone is clearly the aggressor and someone is clearly the victim, that's clearly a police issue, and that will be handled as such as police officers. We will talk to the victim just like we would on the street. What would you like to see done? What's the best way we can help you? You are identified as being a true victim here. And that victim will have the predominant say in what the outcome is. Are they willing to mediate this with the other party? Do they want them charged? And that's the rule of thumb we'll go by. Most incidents don't rise to that level in the school. They are scuffles and fights and things like that, where there really isn't a clear one-sided deal. And that's where you'll typically see the SRO work more closely with the school for some other solution. Sometimes the image is that, well, nothing happened, or that, you know, this person needs something done. But a lot of times people don't see what goes on behind the scenes. And so that's why it's good for me to be able to talk to a group like yourselves who are, you know, concerned about things like that. So with that said, I mean, I'm mostly here for your questions. So have at it.
Right now, there aren't any questions in the chat, so if anyone has one, I guess they can go live mic.
Yeah, I'm gonna go live mic here. So I was kind of talking with Mr. Slauson earlier, and I know some of the times that the person that is getting in fights, or I mean, over the last few years, I know things have kind of escalated in a lot of the schools, a lot more violent or fights going on, and I think a lot of times the person that is causing the problem, if they most of the time they have a troubled home life, not always, but more often, and the parent not quite as concerned of the well-being. So if they tell the student, the parent, that, oh, they did something wrong, they don't care quite as much. And the student kind of gets a pass, and he's like, oh, you got detention, you missed school. And they're like, oh, great, I missed school. They don't care. And I feel that when these things happen in school, to kind of de-escalate some of the increase in violent activity is to be able to do more, either from the school side of things, to have a bigger consequence for that student. So to be like, oh, they're going to stay for the next 3 weeks, and they're going to clean all the gum off all the chairs, or they're going to mop all the floors, or if it's bad enough, they're going to go to juvenile detention or something, so that there's consequences. My son goes there, and all you other parents that have sons and daughters go to school, you don't obviously want fights, whether they're beating up teachers or other classmates. And so I just feel a bigger deterrent is usually needed. And I know sometimes the best thing is, if we want things to change a little bit, we need to maybe spend more time talking to either the principal, the superintendents, or even legislators to see these things happen. Is that correct, Mr. either Norby or Slauson, how things should be approached?
Boy, that question is probably best answered by Mr. Norby. I can tell you this, just generally, that I think the schools and the guidance they get is directed by the voices that they're hearing. Who is approaching and making the noise? You know, it just goes back to that old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Well, if the school and everybody is hearing loud voices pushing them one way, and the other voices aren't speaking up, I don't blame anybody for going with that, you know. So I think it's so vitally important that everybody speak up and share their opinions, approach the school, approach your legislatures, approach the school board. I just think there's a lot of voices out there that aren't speaking up, and I can't blame, you know, that they're not being heard if they're not speaking up. So yeah, I do think it's important to speak up and at least start with the school. Mr. Norby, you have more to add?
Yeah, if I'm answering or heard your kind of your question, Reed, is that, you know, we work with our cops, you know, they're Plymouth PD, And we work with them and the families if there is a victim situation and what's the most appropriate way of resolution. And we try to, and to be honest with you, on the low level stuff, it's always going down the line of deferment. I can't remember, what do you guys call it? Scott, I can't remember what you guys call
Well, there's mediation,
I'll remember it, but that's called
restorative justice.
Yep. And, you know, and we work with our police and we mirror what, if it's a criminal charge, as an example, we work and mirror what that charge would be if it's a criminal event. And, you know, I tell you what, our police, and I'll say this for New Hope cops too, because I spent most of my career at Cooper, that, you know, just, it's all about communication and talking with the victims and the families and even the perpetrator and their families, because most of the time they're hurting as parents that their child may have committed some, you know, harm towards another student. So it's really a tag team work, and we find the best resolution that fits what's going on. But it's really I think it's a tag team where we work together, and our police will say, this isn't going to go anywhere. And they kind of know how it's going to work better than any of us. And we just kind of work together and figure out the best resolution. I don't know if that answered it, but that's kind of where we are as a school.
Well, and my son had a couple of occasions to have interactions with the school resource officer at Armstrong with really good resolutions. And I think the really important thing is to, I liked what you said about where the school resource officers, best case scenario, you have a person in that position who has really, really excellent judgment and who can use deterrent very judiciously, and who can understand that these are people that are in very formative years. And best case scenario, you're going to have an outcome where you have a developing young adult who can learn from a situation and move forward. And that neither of the parties suffered irreparable harm, and that both parties learned something from it. And I know that even when my son was the victim, that doesn't mean that he was wholly lacking in responsibility for his share. And he learned something from it both times. And based on how the resource officer handled it, it felt like both parties learned something from it. And everybody participated in the outcome. And so deterrence can be easy ways out, and everyone feels like the situation was handled, but it doesn't necessarily mean for me that the opportunity to improve that person's future was actually taken advantage of.
Yeah, I can't say there aren't missed opportunities sometimes. It kind of goes back to how valuable the SRO program is. We got, some of the bigger cities getting rid of their SROs, and that's a decision the school has to make. But you really lose that ability, that knowledge of the students, and it's that knowledge and relationship. We talk about all that, but that's what goes to the core of a good decision for a good outcome when there's an incident involving those students. Otherwise, without an SRO, you got a call of a fight at the school and it's in the 911 queue and the officers will get there when they get there. And the street officers, you know, I hate to say it, but they're backed up on calls and they're going to be, is anyone hurt? Who's the victim? Does anyone want to be a victim? Okay, take the report and they're out. And then the next thing is going to be a letter from the juvenile court. And boy, the SROs are so valuable in that context.
You know, and I would agree with Scott in the fact of, and like I said, I'm a big advocate for our SROs, and I know that, you know, Minneapolis and St. Paul pulled them out of their programs, and I'm just being honest with you. I believe in our officers at Armstrong. You know, they're Plymouth, but I also worked with the New Hope cops. I even worked with Fournier when he was a SRO, the chief that just retired. So, I mean, and they're great cops. They will do everything in their power. And I'm just speaking from my experience that I've witnessed in a year and a half at Armstrong, that they will do everything in their power to work with a kid before anything else goes on. And they've been in some tough things that went on at Armstrong and at Cooper too. I think the world of our police and what they've done for our schools. And I've been very clear to our superintendent or interim and Dr. Jenkins before that do not pull the cops out of our buildings. Think about this. We're 2,000 kids. Cooper's at about 1,700. It's a small city.
Mm-hmm.
Small cities with lots of hormones. I mean, that's a busy, it can be very busy. And I think the cops that we have are doing just an amazing job.
Yeah.
I
And I know it comes down to a question of resources and price, and it's incredibly expensive for a school to chip in, you know, the salary for an SRO. And as a city, we see the benefits of that, and that's why we've taken on a bigger cost share for the SROs, because it benefits us, it benefits the community in the future. You can't tell you know, Detective Galley and Sergeant Tenek still run into people that recognize them from the school, and those relationships are invaluable when we're dealing with police incidents in the future, and it has a value for everybody. So,
And I do want to just address, I see Ms. Erickson has just about to clarify, are the incidents indeed on the rise or just a rumor? And if you're talking about Armstrong, our incidents before COVID hit us in March of last year, our incidents were down, and they were considerably down. If you're talking of assaults or fights, thefts, those are our big ones. Those were down, and they were considerably down from the year before I got there. And Dr. Jenkins said you would take credit for the fact of you had no incidents from March until June because we were out, nobody was in session or nobody was in Armstrong. So that's kind of the misleading number. But before, we checked the numbers before, and they were definitely down. And again, we had a couple biggies that were noticeable, but that was handled and you know, appropriately and went through the right channels. But yeah, the incidences are definitely, and I will say that's a big part of it is because of our police.
Did Andrea have a question?
No, I was just going to read the question on the chat because I was curious about that too. Mr. Norby probably knows me from my daughter, who is a junior, is Evelyn Ruiz. And she did have a very rough year. We came to Armstrong from a very small town in Wisconsin. So for them to have so much diversity here in Armstrong and such a larger population is definitely a big change for my girls. But thankfully the resources were there, and I know Mr. Norby worked with me in regards to that, and I encourage you know, and support 100% having the officer in school, because it's definitely a great resource. And also education, you know, not only for our students, but also for the family. I know I had to educate and reinvent myself in trying to understand my sophomore at that time. And hormones, I have 5 daughters, and there's hormones all the time, every single day, something different. And now I have a freshman, so I'm hoping that she's a little calmer than Evelyn, but yeah, it's something that it's a day-to-day learning that has to happen. So I appreciate it for sure. Mr. Norby laughed when I said Evelyn's name.
Well, I put my direct contact info in the text chat. I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time. So please reach out if there's something I can answer.
I just wanted to say something really quick. We kind of talked about briefly before. Is there anything, so obviously we know the environment we're living in right now, this whole summer.
Mhm.
Is there things in which the police departments are doing to really soften the touch between the police and the residents and the kids, and so that there can be a much better bond, and that they feel that they're, I mean, I totally respect the police and I want you there and I want you to be at the schools and everything else, but there's still, you have people that are afraid of the police, and but an image that kind of can soften it so that kids and adults can respect you again and treat you like you should be, but also that there's a softness to you. You're not to be afraid of you when you see a police officer. You want to address some things you maybe are doing?
Well, the short answer is nothing different. We've been proud to always have that approach here. We've had a relation, things like that. The mental health training and awareness, that all got created by statute this past year. We've been doing that for decades with our department. It didn't affect us in the least. We've been doing that all along. So is Plymouth, and going back to the actual, you know, relationship building with the kids, like you're saying, we treat people the best we possibly can. We deal with people when they're at their worst. We understand that. We have a lot of understanding. Our officers try to be the best people they can and be the most positive image they can every day. Officers have bad days just like everybody else. They get crabby sometimes. But all in all, they really try to put the best face on every day and make that positive impression. We can't change people's attitudes. We can't, you know, automatically change their attitudes, but their attitudes towards us are built over time, over repeated contacts, saying, wow, I've had a lot of contacts with New Hope Police, and maybe none, maybe only one was bad. And that's where they develop that attitude towards us. It's just, we have to maintain that positivity and do the best we can over time. That's the only way you're going to instill, you know, change in attitude in people, I think.
Okay, well, I really appreciate you coming. I know we're kind of running a little bit long. We're trying to get to a few little issues before we wrap things up, and then actually the presidential debate, I think that's actually starting now. But so I appreciate you coming and spending some time speaking with us, and also putting your contact information on. And thanks again, I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you all. Good night.
Night.